My husband looked me in the eyes and told me to cancel my sister's wedding. 11 days before. Everything was booked. Everything was ready. I thought he was crazy. But he said, "Trust me first." And when he finally showed me the truth, I wished I had listened sooner. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning my husband Daniel asked me to sit down at the kitchen table and said those 8 words, "You need to cancel your sister's wedding," I thought he had lost his mind. I had just come back from a bridal shop with Sophie's veil neatly folded in a white box on the passenger seat of my car. The wedding was 11 days away. Everything was booked, paid for, and perfectly planned. Flowers, food, music, venue, every last detail had been arranged over 18 months of careful preparation. And my little sister Sophie, 31 years old and more in love than I had ever seen any human being, was counting on me to make sure her big day went exactly the way she had always dreamed. So when my husband of 9 years sat across from me with that expression, still, careful, the kind of look he only gets when something truly serious is happening, I felt the air leave the room. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "What are you talking about?" He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at me. "I know how this sounds, Claire. I know how much you love Sophie and how hard you've worked on this wedding. But I need you to trust me right now, and I need you to make that call." I stared at him. My husband is not a dramatic man. He is an accountant. He likes spreadsheets, Saturday morning coffee, and long walks with our dog Biscuit. He does not create scenes. He does not ask for impossible things. In 9 years of marriage, I could count on one hand the number of times he had spoken to me with that level of weight in his voice. So even though every instinct in my body told me he was wrong, even though the veil was sitting in its white box on the counter and Sophie was expecting me for lunch in 3 hours, I did not immediately say no. I said, "Tell me why." "My name is Claire Hartwell. I am 36 years old, and I am the older of 2 daughters. Our father, Gerald Hartwell, was a quiet and hardworking man who spent 30 years managing a regional hardware distribution company before he retired. Our mother, Joan, was warm and social in the way that some mothers are, always the one organizing the neighborhood dinners, always the first to bring food when someone on the street was sick. Sophie and I grew up in a house that smelled like her baking and his newspaper, and for most of our childhood, we were close. Not perfectly close, sisters never are, but genuinely close. We shared a room until I was 13. She used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. I used to read to her on Sunday afternoons when she was too small to hold a chapter book on her own. As adults, the gap between us had grown in the normal ways. I moved to a different city for university, stayed for work, met Daniel, and built a life there. Sophie stayed closer to home. She worked in events planning, which suited her perfectly. She was organized, creative, and magnetic in a way that made people want to do things for her. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and people turned to look, not because she demanded it but because she simply had a warmth that drew eyes. Our mother adored her. Not in a way that made me feel unloved, I want to be clear about that, but in the particular way that mothers sometimes adore the child who stayed nearby. Sophie met Marcus Webb 2 years ago at a friend's birthday dinner. He was 34, a project manager at a mid-size construction firm, and from everything she told me, from the very first night, she felt something different. "He listens to me, Claire," she told me on the phone about a month into their relationship. "Like he actually listens. He asks questions and then remembers what I said the week before." I told her that was called being a decent person, and she laughed and said that was the point. She had been waiting a long time to find one. I met Marcus 4 months later and I liked him immediately. He was easy to be around, funny without trying too hard, and the way he looked at Sophie was something I recognized. It was the same way Daniel had looked at me when we were new. Like she was a thing worth paying attention to. When Marcus proposed, Sophie called me before she called our mother. I took that as the greatest compliment of my adult life. The wedding planning began almost immediately. Sophie asked me to be her maid of honor, which I had been expecting and which filled me with genuine joy. She had a clear vision, a garden ceremony at a renovated historic estate about 40 minutes outside the city, evening reception in a stone hall with candles everywhere, a menu built around her favorite foods, and a dress that she described as old Hollywood but real, not costume. I helped her find the venue, attended every tasting, drove her to her final dress fittings, and spent more weekend hours on spreadsheets than my accountant husband. It had been, honestly, one of the most enjoyable experiences of my adult life. I felt close to Sophie in a way I hadn't since we were young. Everything was set. The venue was beautiful. Marcus's family was lovely. Our mother was beside herself with excitement. There was nothing, as far as I could see, that was wrong with any of it. Which is why, sitting across from Daniel at our kitchen table with 11 days to go, I could not make sense of what he was saying. You need to cancel your sister's wedding. I know how that sounds, Claire. But I need you to trust me right now. Daniel, I said again, more firmly this time. Tell me exactly what you know and why you know it. Because I am not making any call to Sophie or to that venue unless you give me a reason that makes sense. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up, went to his desk in the corner of our living room, and came back with his laptop. He set it on the table and turned it toward me. I need you to read these, he said. What I read over the next 40 minutes changed everything. Daniel had been doing Sophie's personal accounting for the past 8 months. It had started casually. Sophie had mentioned she was overwhelmed by tax filings, he had offered to help as a one-time favor, and then it had become a quiet ongoing arrangement. She paid him a small amount, he organized her finances, and neither of them had mentioned it to me in any significant detail because there was nothing significant to mention. Until, about 6 weeks before the wedding, there was. The first thing Daniel showed me was a set of bank transfers. Over the course of the previous 3 months, a total of just over $14,000 had left Sophie's accounts in amounts small enough to avoid automatic flags, 800 here, 600 there, sometimes twice in a single week. The receiving account belonged to a man named Ryan Coulter. I did not recognize the name. I said so. Daniel nodded. I didn't either. So I looked into it. Ryan Coulter is 38 years old. He lives in a city about 2 hours from here. He has a record, 2 counts of fraud, 1 conviction, served 14 months, released 3 years ago. He paused. He also has a dating profile on a site called Connect Heart. His profile says his name is Ryan Cole. He lists himself as a freelance photographer. He says he's 32. I felt something cold move through me. Daniel. I'm not done, he said, gently but firmly. When I found the name and ran a search, I found something else. He clicked to a different document. This is a series of messages I found copied into a notes file on the shared cloud account Sophie set up for the wedding budget. I don't think she realized the sync was set to include all notes, not just the budget folders. I looked at the messages. They were between Sophie and Ryan Coulter. They went back almost 5 months. They were not the messages of 2 strangers. They were detailed, personal, familiar. He called her, my soul. She called him, the only one who really knows me. There were long conversations about unhappiness, about feeling unseen, about how her upcoming wedding felt like walking toward a door she wasn't sure she wanted to open. And there were explicit references to the money. He had asked for it in stages, each time with a story. Medical bills. A work contract that fell through. A deposit on an apartment they could share, once everything was sorted. Once everything was sorted. I sat with that phrase for a long moment. He's been manipulating her, I said. Yes, Daniel said. 4 months. She thinks she is in love with him. And he has been taking her money while she prepares to walk down the aisle with someone else. I want to tell you that I immediately knew what to do. I want to say I was calm and strategic and that I had a clear plan within minutes. But the truth is I sat at that table and I cried. Not for long, maybe 10 minutes, but hard. Because Sophie was my little sister who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. Because I had spent 18 months helping her plan a wedding. Because Marcus Webb was a genuinely good man who was 11 days away from marrying a woman who was secretly sending money to a convicted fraudster who was calling her my soul and telling her that everything would be sorted once she, what, exactly? Left her fiancé. Disappeared with him. Was left broke and alone when he moved on to the next target. I cried because I was angry, and I cried because I was heartbroken, and I cried because I was terrified of what any path forward was going to cost. Daniel let me cry. He made tea, real tea, properly brewed, which he only does when things are serious, and he sat beside me and held my hand and waited. Why didn't you come to me sooner? I finally asked. Because I needed to be certain, he said. I didn't want to bring you something half-formed that turned out to have an innocent explanation. I spent 3 weeks making sure there wasn't one. He looked at me steadily. There isn't one, Claire. I believed him. In 9 years, Daniel had never brought me a half-formed anything. So what do we do? I asked. We have a few options, he said. We can tell Sophie directly. We can tell Marcus. We can contact a lawyer first. We can report Coulter to the police. He paused. Or some combination. But I think there is one thing that needs to happen before any of the others. You need to talk to Sophie. Not accuse her. Not confront her. Talk to her. Because if she's been manipulated this way for months, she is going to need her sister on the other side of this, not someone who stood at a distance and made decisions for her. He was right. He was completely right. And it was, without question, the most difficult conversation I have ever had to prepare for in my life. I called Sophie and asked if we could meet. Just the two of us, I said. I wanted to go over some final details for the wedding and I thought it would be nice to do it over dinner. She said yes without hesitation, cheerful and warm as she always was, and we arranged to meet at a restaurant near her apartment 2 days later. Those 2 days were some of the hardest of my life. I moved through them in a kind of quiet fog, doing normal things, going to work, walking biscuit, cooking dinner, while carrying this enormous secret that I did not know how to set down. Daniel checked on me every few hours. He printed out the key documents and organized them in a folder in case I needed them. He offered twice to come with me to the dinner, but I said no. Whatever was going to happen at that table needed to be between Sophie and me first. The night of the dinner, I arrived at the restaurant early and chose a table in the back corner, away from the noise. When Sophie walked in, she looked beautiful, a little tired around the eyes, maybe, but glowing in the way that brides-to-be often do in the final weeks. She hugged me and sat down and immediately started talking about the florist changing one of the centerpiece arrangements and whether I thought it would matter. I listened. I smiled. I ordered wine I didn't drink. And then, about 20 minutes into the meal, I put my fork down and I said, Sophie, I need to talk to you about something. It's not easy, and I need you to hear me out before you respond. Can you do that? She looked at me across the table. Something shifted in her face, not guilt, exactly, but a kind of alertness. Okay, she said quietly. I told her everything. I told her that Daniel had found the transfers while managing her accounts. I told her about Ryan Coulter, his real name, his record, the fraud convictions. I told her I had seen the messages, and I was sorry for the way they had been found, but that I was not sorry Daniel had found them because I believed with everything in me that this man was not who he had told her he was. I did not accuse her of ruining her engagement or betraying Marcus. I did not tell her she was stupid or naive. I said, I think someone has been targeting you, and I think it has been going on for a long time, and I need you to know that I am not here to judge you. I am here because you are my sister and I love you and I need you to be safe. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. Sophie did not cry at first. She went very still and very pale, and she stared at the table. I watched her hands tighten around her water glass and then slowly release. A minute passed. Then 2. Then she said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "How much do you know?" "Enough," I said. "But I want you to tell me what I don't know. If you want to." And then she cried. It came out slowly at first and then all at once. She had met Ryan Coulter 6 months ago through the Connect Heart platform, not actively seeking anything, she said, just curious. She'd made a profile and then almost immediately forgotten about it until he messaged her. He had been attentive and perceptive in a way she hadn't expected. He said things that felt true about her, noticed things in how she wrote that she had never told anyone, made her feel known. She had told herself it was harmless. An online friendship. Something that filled a space she hadn't admitted was empty. "I was scared," she said. "About the wedding. About whether I was ready. About whether Marcus and I were, I don't know, whether we wanted the same things. And I told Ryan that, and he didn't try to fix it, he just listened, and that felt like," she stopped. "It felt like what I needed." "And the money?" I asked. She closed her eyes. "He needed help. He explained each time. I believed him each time." She opened her eyes and looked at me, and in her face I saw something that I recognized, not dishonesty, but the specific shame of someone who knows they have been fooled and cannot yet forgive themselves for it. I told myself I was helping a friend. I didn't let myself look at what it actually was. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Sophie. You were manipulated by someone who does this professionally. This is what he does. This is what he has done before, to other people, which is why he has a criminal record for it. This is not your failure. This is his crime." She squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. I let her. We sat in that restaurant for 3 more hours. We ordered food we hardly ate. We talked, really talked, in the way that sisters sometimes go years without doing and then suddenly can't stop. Sophie told me things I hadn't known, that she had been anxious about the wedding for months, not about Marcus specifically but about the permanence of it, the weight of the commitment, and how that anxiety had made her vulnerable to something that felt like an escape hatch. She told me that she loved Marcus, truly loved him, but that love hadn't stopped the fear from building. And I told her things I hadn't said either. That I had seen, in the past few months, a kind of quiet distance in her that I hadn't known how to name. That I had assumed it was wedding nerves and hadn't pushed. That I was sorry I hadn't pushed. By the end of the night, one thing was clear between us: the wedding could not happen in 11 days. Not because Sophie didn't love Marcus, but because Sophie needed time, to deal with Coulter, to speak honestly with Marcus about the fear she'd been carrying alone, to give their relationship the space to absorb the truth rather than be buried by it. "He's going to be so hurt," Sophie said. "He might be," I said. "But he will be more hurt if you walk down that aisle with all of this still inside you. He deserves to know you. And you deserve to let him." The call to the venue was mine to make. Sophie sat beside me in my car outside the restaurant and I dialed the events coordinator and explained that due to an urgent family matter, the wedding of Sophie Hartwell and Marcus Webb would need to be postponed. The coordinator was professional and kind. There were fees involved, not small ones, but Sophie had wedding insurance that covered a portion of them, and Daniel, when I told him later that night, immediately offered to negotiate with the vendors on her behalf. He spent the following week on the phone and over email, quietly reducing the financial damage as much as he could. Marcus was told the truth, by Sophie, the next afternoon, in a conversation that lasted 4 hours and that I was not present for but that I waited for by the phone the entire time. She told him about the fear, about the online relationship, about the money, about Ryan Coulter's criminal history. She did not soften any of it. Marcus called me the following evening. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet and careful, the voice of someone who has been crying and stopped. "I mean it, Claire. Thank you for not letting it get buried. Are you okay? I asked. A long pause. I will be, he said. We both will be, I think. We just need some time to do it right. He was not wrong. They did not break up. Marcus took 2 weeks to himself to process, and Sophie spent that same time speaking with a therapist that Daniel and I helped her find. They met again after those 2 weeks and began, very slowly, to rebuild the conversation that the wedding plans had been covering up. They talked about fear and permanence and what they actually wanted from their life together, the conversations that should have happened before a venue was booked, that had been waiting underneath the flower arrangements and the seating charts. As for Ryan Coulter, Daniel compiled the financial records and the message history, and we reported him to the authorities 3 days after the wedding was postponed. A detective we spoke to said that this type of case was more common than most people knew and that the records Daniel had compiled were unusually thorough. The investigation moved forward. I don't know every detail of what happened after that, but I know that Sophie received a portion of her money back and that the case did not close quietly. What I did not know until much later was how long Daniel had been sitting with this alone. He told me the full story one evening about 2 weeks after the wedding was postponed, when things had settled enough for us to actually talk rather than just manage. He had first noticed something unusual in Sophie's accounts in early spring, a pattern of small outgoing transfers that did not match any known vendor, subscription, or regular expense. At first he had assumed it was something personal she had simply not mentioned, a private savings account, a loan repayment, something ordinary. He had made a note and moved on. But then it happened again the following week. And the week after that. And when he searched the receiving account number and found it linked to a name rather than a business, he began to feel, as he described it, a low hum of wrongness that I could not explain but could not ignore. He spent 3 evenings at his desk after I had gone to sleep, quietly and methodically building a picture. He was careful. He wanted to be wrong. He checked every possible innocent explanation before he allowed himself to consider the one that wasn't innocent at all. Why didn't you tell me while you were still looking? I asked him. Because you would have gone straight to Sophie, he said simply. And if I had been wrong, it would have damaged something between you that couldn't easily be repaired. You love her too much to hear something half-formed about her and stay calm. I needed to be certain first. I sat with that for a long time. He was right. I would have gone straight to her. I would have been loud and scared and protective, and I would have made it about my feelings before I made it about hers. Daniel had protected both of us, Sophie from a premature confrontation, and me from the version of myself that acts before it thinks. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. Sophie's therapy began in the 2nd week after the postponement. She had resisted at first, not out of pride exactly, but out of the particular kind of exhaustion that comes after a long shock, when the idea of talking about something at length feels like being asked to run after you've already fallen. Daniel and I did not push. We simply found the name of a good therapist, left it on a piece of paper on Sophie's kitchen counter when we came to check on her, and said nothing more about it. 3 days later she called and made an appointment herself. She told me afterward, weeks into the process, that the most useful thing her therapist had said was this, that loneliness inside a relationship is not a sign that the relationship is wrong. It is a sign that something inside it has gone unspoken for too long. Sophie had been lonely in her engagement, not because Marcus was absent or unkind, but because she had been afraid to tell him about her fear, and that unspoken fear had slowly built a wall she hadn't noticed until someone on the other side of a screen had found a crack in it and walked right through. I let a stranger know me better than I let Marcus know me, she said to me one afternoon, sitting in my kitchen with both hands around a mug of tea. Because I thought Marcus would be disappointed. I thought if he knew I was scared, he would think I didn't love him enough. She looked at me. But that's not how it works, is it? No, I said. That is exactly backwards from how it works. She nodded slowly. I know that now. There was one afternoon, about 6 weeks after the postponement, that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I had stopped by Sophie's apartment to drop off some paperwork she needed, something related to the refund from the original venue, and when she opened the door, Marcus was there. He was sitting at her kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a notepad between them, and they were talking. Not performing talking. Actually talking, in the low, careful way of people working something out together. He stood when I came in, and I said I wouldn't stay, just dropping this off, and he said, quietly, without drama, "Claire, I want you to know that I understand what you did." "And why?" He paused. "I was angry for a few days. I won't pretend I wasn't. But I've thought about it, and if you hadn't done what you did, I would have married someone who was keeping half of herself away from me. And I would never have known why." He looked at Sophie then, briefly, with the kind of steadiness that is not performance. "I'd rather have the hard version of the truth than the comfortable version of a lie. I left their apartment and sat in my car for 5 minutes before I could drive. Not because I was sad. Because some moments are too full to move through quickly. The night before the real wedding, the September one, at the farmhouse, I could not sleep. I lay in the dark beside Daniel and listened to him breathe and thought about all of it. The white box with the veil on the counter. The kitchen table. The laptop screen. The restaurant. Sophie's hands around her water glass. Marcus's voice on the phone, quiet and careful. My mother's 2 words, "Both of you." I thought about how close it had come. 11 days. If Daniel had waited 1 more week to tell me, the invitations would have been sent, the final payments made, the point of no return passed. Sophie would have walked down an aisle carrying a secret that would have hollowed out her marriage from the inside before it had even properly begun. And none of us would have known why things eventually fell apart. We would have made up other explanations. We would have been wrong. I reached over in the dark and found Daniel's hand. He was awake. He took my hand without a word, which is the thing about people who know you well, they don't need you to explain why you've reached for them at 1 in the morning. They just hold on. "Thank you," I said, very quietly. A pause. Then, "Go to sleep, Claire. You're going to cry all day tomorrow and you need the rest." He was not wrong about that either. I want to tell you about the moment, about a month after all of this, when my mother found out. Our mother Joan had been told only that the wedding was postponed due to a personal matter that Sophie and Marcus were working through. She had taken it with relative grace, though I knew she was hurting. She had been looking forward to that day for a year and a half. When Sophie finally sat down with her and told her the full truth, Joan went quiet in the way that older mothers sometimes do when they are absorbing something too large to react to immediately. Later that evening, Mom called me. "Tell Daniel I said thank you," she said. "He protected my girl. Both of you did." I had to put the phone down for a moment so she wouldn't hear me cry. The wedding happened 7 months later. Not at the same venue, a different one, smaller and quieter, a renovated farmhouse with a garden full of lavender and old oak trees. The guest list was reduced by almost half. The menu was simpler. The flowers were wildflowers instead of arrangements, loose and real-looking in glass jars on every table. Sophie had chosen all of it herself this time, without external input, and every single choice felt like her. She walked down the aisle on a Sunday afternoon in September. My mother walked beside her. The light was gold and low the way it gets in early autumn, and it fell across the garden in long slanted lines that made everything look like a photograph of itself. I stood at the front as maid of honor and watched Marcus Webb see his bride for the first time, and I want to tell you what I saw in his face. It was not the polite admiration of someone performing happiness for a crowd. It was something quieter and more real, recognition, almost, like someone seeing a familiar thing after a long time away. Like coming back to something you had been afraid of losing. Sophie smiled at him and it was the most honest expression I had ever seen on her face. I cried before the vows even started. Daniel, standing in the second row, caught my eye and smiled. He had a handkerchief ready. He had known I would need it. That evening, after dinner, after the dancing, after our mother had been persuaded off the dance floor by 3 separate people and had only laughed and kept going, I found a quiet moment alone with Daniel near the edge of the garden where the lavender was darkening in the evening light. "You know," I said, "when you told me to cancel the wedding, I thought you were out of your mind." He smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't need to say anything. "I trusted you anyway," I said. "Even before you showed me anything. Because in 9 years, you have never asked me for something without a reason worth hearing." He took my hand. And I said, looking back toward the light and music spilling from the farmhouse, toward my sister dancing with her husband, "I think the wedding we just watched was worth so much more than the one we cancelled." He squeezed my hand. I leaned into him and watched my sister laugh at something Marcus had said, loud and unguarded, the way she used to laugh when we were small and the world was simple. There are people in your life who protect you when you don't know you need protection. There are people who will carry hard truths carefully in their hands and wait for the right moment to offer them to you, not to cause pain but to prevent it. I had always known Daniel was good. That September evening, watching my sister's real wedding happen in a garden full of lavender and fading light, I understood that good was not even close to the right word. He had seen something I had missed. He had done the hard, unglamorous work of making sure. He had asked me to trust him before he could tell me why, and when I had, everything that followed, the pain, the postponement, the difficult conversations, the slow rebuilding, had led exactly here. To this. To my sister, truly happy. To a marriage that had been chosen clearly, with eyes open and nothing hidden. To the right wedding, after all.